Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, on to that later in the programme as well. I don't know quite what to say about the next story, the story that we're going to start with today. There are two elements to it, actually, and I think that they should frighten the bejesus out of us. I think they should. You know, I don't want to start wanging on about the American election results yet. We'll talk to Simon Marks at 11:45, but I still find it astonishing that proper media, sort of objective news organisations that have to report the facts, still seem baffled by the appeal of fascist rhetoric. It's that to me now has become the biggest worry. Donald Trump didn't have a good night overnight, but he certainly didn't have a disastrous night. It was far from a complete repudiation and rejection of his divisive nativist rhetoric, and plenty of decent people fall for it. And as we've tracked many times on this programme, the further away you are from whatever you prefer to call it, diversity or multiculture, or for me, I'd just say the 21st century, urban 21st century, or Opidian 21st century, the further away you are from it, the easier it is to make you really frightened of it. So America splits into two halves. Does it stand by your beds? Yes, I think it might be, actually. That's a boarding school thing, is it? Or a military thing for inspection? Stand by your beds! Coming around to check your uniform has been correctly folded. Two Americas. One is inward-looking and quite fearful, and the other is outward-looking and unafraid of change and difference. But the people who are frightened of it aren't bad people. They are, however, the people that facilitate authoritarian and fascistic regimes. And Trump pushes almost all of the buttons of authoritarian and fascistic regimes. Again, as with almost everything we talk about in the crucible of really important politics, that distinction between the people being led and the people deliberately doing the leading is very important to draw. And I mention all of that because it, I think, involves an element of objective journalism, or I suppose you could loosely describe it as liberal outlook, by which I simply mean looking at everything rather than just looking at people who agree with you. I think there are moments where we see like a regime like Franco rises in Spain, or most obviously, of course, Adolf Hitler in Germany, although that actually has more specific variables than other fascistic rises. You look at Mussolini in Italy, to a lesser extent. I don't think I put Tito on the list, actually, but you wonder when you look back at history how this stuff happened. And there must be moments, and I am going a bit over the top today because I will in a moment be talking about the British government, which obviously isn't fascistic in any meaningful sense yet. But there must be moments when the broader population, the centre ground, let's call it, the centre ground watched something happen and had an inkling that this was really, really serious and deeply dangerous, but sort of thought, well, look, the business is going on as normal. The world is turning. Life goes on. Maybe it's not that big a deal. After all, maybe I'm just having a bit of a tizzy. Maybe I'm overreacting. And I'm having one of those moments today. I have them quite a lot at the moment. I'm so lucky to have this job. What the hell would I do if I didn't have this job? I'd be sitting on the top deck of the bus trying to get you to talk to me about Theresa May. Good Lord. I promise I will never ever do that. As long as even after they've handed me my sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap, you will never find me on the top deck of the E3 trying to bend your ear about Brexit. Never say never, James. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. All right, I won't do it on the E3. I might do it on the 272, which doesn't have a top deck, as any fool know. So I've got one of those moments today. I'm looking at two stories involving this government, and I'm thinking two things. I'm pretty sure this hasn't happened before, or, more pertinently perhaps, I'm pretty sure we haven't been aware of this before. Possibly other governments have done it, in which case turn down the dial of... What dial of what? Is it shock that I'm describing? Concern. So my concern about this story is close to 10 at the moment. I haven't told you what the story is yet, have I? But my concern about it is close to 10. If it turns out that lots of other governments have done this thing in the past, and either I missed it or it wasn't properly reported, but we now know that they did, I can turn it down 2 or 3. You know, because, okay, it's not evidence of a lurch in a very troubling new direction. But at the moment, it's 9. And the purpose of today's programme is to either turn it down or to hit the 10 by 11. 0345 6060 973. Tiny bit Spinal Tap there for fans of that masterpiece. That's the number you need. It'd be, of course, a bit odd if you rang in already, given that I haven't told you what the story is that's got my concern dial at 9. And it's this. Experts hired by the government to test cladding 12 days after the Grenfell Tower fire were banned from criticising Theresa May or doing anything to embarrass her. Now, you also know, or you may not know, I have told you, but you'd be forgiven for forgetting, that companies were threatened with losing government business and or subsidies if they publicly criticised Brexit. So if you're sitting now looking at Brexit wondering why all these companies are shutting down and moving, one in Plymouth today, the MP down there, Johnny Mercer, has tweeted about a 52-year-old company, German-owned, that's quitting because of Brexit uncertainty. It was Wales yesterday that saw 2 massive manufacturing plants close or announce their imminent closure because of Brexit. And it's happening all over the country. You can put your fingers in your... or you can close your eyes and put gammon in your ears if you want, but it doesn't stop it from happening. So, all right, quick, another Trump reference there. Of course, if you've got a political leader that denies that it's happening, that says things that are demonstrably untrue, you have another little tick in the road to fascism. Those tax cuts for the middle classes that he announced were kicking in just before the election. Utterly non-existent. Utterly non-existent. So there is another little fascistic nod there, but we're not like that yet in this country. And no one's denying that it's happening. All we're doing is banning businesses from telling us about their concerns and their fears. And Theresa May's logic would have been, the less fear there is, the more effective my negotiations will be. And you can even see a sort of semblance of logic to that position. But this isn't about the Brexit gags. This is about Grenfell Tower. Companies brought in to test cladding less than a fortnight after the tragedy were banned from creating any adverse publicity about the Cabinet Office or other Crown bodies. Give me a ring and tell me why that isn't a cause for massive concern, all right? 0345 6060 973. This is the government. This is a tragedy of unprecedented proportion that has happened on this government's watch. The unfolding inquiry notwithstanding, this is a profoundly political tragedy because, as we know, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, a Conservative council, was squirreling away money on I think a unique scale nationally, wealthiest, biggest bank balance in the country, while perhaps scrimping and saving on a refurbishment that left 72 people, ultimately left 72 people dead. So you bring in people to look at the facts and the figures, the decisions and the materials, but they're banned from saying anything that might cast the government in a bad light. Now, let's try to park the politics if we can, because if there is nothing bad, if there's nothing that puts the government in a bad light, that's perfectly plausible. It's perfectly plausible, right? Why would you need a gagging place? It's like the NDAs that we were learning about last week in the context of the Philip Green story. If there's nothing embarrassing that I could say about you, why do you need me to sign a document promising that I won't say anything about you? So that's the Grenfell angle on this story, okay? That's why my concern dial is at 9. There is a theory out there that the plan all along, and this is a little bit tinfoil hat, the plan all along has been to fall off the Brexit cliff, to go out with a no deal, because the combination of that chaos plus Henry VIII powers and the mechanics, the mechanisms of government would give whoever was in Downing Street after a no-deal Brexit would give them absolutely unprecedented powers to redraw the country's unwritten constitution and to redraw the relationship between capital and labour on an unprecedented scale. But I don't yet buy that. This story adds a little bit of weight to the possibility that that is the plan, because what we have here is a government that's sort of indulging in medieval style, or at least, communist style suppression of news. 0345 606 0973, because the other fellow who's been doing it is Chris Grayling. So you'll be aware of his utterly disastrous overhaul of the probation system, £3 billion. You know, they listen to this programme looking for things to complain about. You think they'd listen to the people who ring in, like probation officers and prison officers, who describe their plans with detail and knowledge as being utterly ridiculous, but still they press on with them. And he essentially put a gag on justice charities who were in a position to criticise the aftermath of what he did. So if you look at a charity called Change, Grow, Live, one of the largest charities in Britain, £200 million a year, working on prisoner rehabilitation, no criticism at all of the probation crisis. And it would appear that this is because getting government contracts involves promising not to criticise the government. It's 1016. 40 companies? No, 300 companies, 40 charities. Estimate they did something similar with Universal Credit, charities who were brought in, if you like, to help with Universal Credit, banned from criticising it. Chris Grayling banning charities from criticising his disastrous overhaul of the probation system if they wanted to receive any government money. I just want, on a scale of 1 to 10, to dial down my fears about this phenomenon by 11 o'clock today, because at the moment I'm at 9. And if you think about history, there must have been moments as really dodgy regimes rose, and sometimes I think they rise by accident. There must have been moments when people like you and me sat there going, that's a bit, whoa, what, they've done what? No. That can't be, that's what I'm wondering today. Are we in one of those moments now? Jonathan's in Newquay. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Well, James, I just, for once, I've got to disagree with you.
Oh, good.
You said that
So you're going to turn me down, are you? We're going to turn down my...
No, I'm going to turn you up to 9.5.
Oh, my days.
Or higher, mate.
Go
Sorry.
on. It's not Spinal Tap. It doesn't go any higher than 10.
Well, it might today.
Go on.
Right, okay. It's 1986, Public Order Act. There's various bits in it, but I'll just quote you the bit about riot, which is a kind of statutory offence in England and Wales, where 12 or more people are present together and use or threaten unlawful violence for a common purpose and the conduct of them taken together.
I do remember this, and I know where you're going, and it was partly to do with...
This is a fascist.
Well, no. It's not relevant to what I'm discussing today. It might add to your conviction that this is
controlling.
Yes, possibly. But, I mean, it's the threat of violence, isn't it, that dilutes the horror of that legislation?
Well, the threat of violence could be, I don't like you, you ugly git, I'm going to have a go at you.
Yeah, but if you've got 500,000 people at the bottom of your garden shouting that, I think you probably should be broken up. I was out with 700,000 other people just a couple of Saturdays ago, and there was a lot of passion on the streets of London, and a lot of concern, and a lot of anger, and a lot of love, of course, because it was a Remainer march. But
you had to ask permission to have that march.
Well, yeah, of course I did. Otherwise, you know, the traffic would have ground to a... You can't have 700,000 people turning up in London without any organisation in place, and you can't have any organisation in place unless you've applied for permission.
Well, I agree with that to a certain point.
I'm still at 9.
You're still at 9.
I'm still at 9.
Hang on a minute. Let me go. Common purpose can be inferred from conduct.
No, I know, but I'm talking more about governments banning Organisations that are getting money from government, because that money is all of ours. It's not Theresa May's money. It's our money. It's all of our money. And organisations that are brought in to assist with or ameliorate the effects of everything from a probation overhaul through to universal credit, into Brexit preparations, and then, of course, the story on the front of the Times today, which looks at the Grenfell Tower investigations. You bring in organisations, either commercial or charitable or both. You seek their expertise, but you ban them from criticising you on pain of losing the contract. That's absolutely terrifying.
With you on that point, but it's like these NDAs, non-disclosure agreements.
I already
it's
said
all
that.
part and parcel of a gagging process to make sure that.
Yes, but again, I'm not that perturbed when a billionaire persuade someone who is poised to dish the dirt on her or him not to dish the dirt in return for a bunch of money. I mean, that is an autonomous decision that everyone is free to make. This is governmental, and it's absolutely chilling. Jonathan, you're perfectly entitled to add other areas of chill, but you haven't chilled me any further on the simple question of gagging companies and charities who are working with or for government from criticising government. Is there anyone that I'm not communicating my concern to? I guess I need a cold flannel. Has anyone got a cold flannel? Does anyone want to ring in and apply a metaphorical cold flannel to my forehead? 0345 6060 973. Because these Henry VIII powers that everyone talks about in the context of Brexit, they essentially offer a Prime Minister the right to change laws and to do things without even consulting Parliament. Jackie is in Woodford. Jackie, calm me down quickly.
No, sorry, it's going to get much worse. I was going to say exactly the same thing about the universal credit. And they were saying about, everyone had been told they mustn't criticise Esther McVeigh,
yes,
and they mustn't criticise government policy. And one of the Tory MPs, a lady, went on the radio and said, or television, she said, no, that's just normal policy. If outside companies or outside charities are taking government money off us for helping people, then they're not allowed to criticise us. Or
how do we know? Because in a way, if that it has always been the case, then I will go down to 7, actually.
No, I shouldn't think it's always been the case.
How would we know? I mean, who would be able to tell us? I suppose the charities can't tell us because they've been gagged.
I know, exactly.
Well, they're probably allowed to criticise previous governments, so they can't criticise this one.
The global crisis.
I mean, I'm just checking the story, and it's all there. I find myself seeking out local newspapers now more than some of the national newspapers. Charities and groups from the Liverpool Echo. Charities and groups have been made to sign gagging clauses to protect the reputation of Tory welfare chief Esther McVeigh. It has been claimed.
Yeah.
Again, this story originated in the Times. 22 organisations signed an agreement as part of deals relating to projects helping the unemployed back into work worth. Can you take a punt at the number, Jackie?
No.
£1.8 billion worth of business on the table. You want a piece of this?
Oh, my gosh.
You button your lip.
And there's me. You said you want a cold flannel. There's me with no gas since 2013 because the bedroom tax. I was going to say I've got plenty of cold flannels for you.
Okay, metaphorical for now. 27 minutes after 10. Jackie, thank you. So we've got that one on the list as well. Esther McVeigh. I mean, there must be something, especially if you're somebody who generally finds my position on the issues of the day to be wrong-headed. Give me a buzz, seriously, and tell me why I'm wrong about this one as well, why you're cool with the fact that the government can offer money to companies and charities on the proviso that they never criticise the government. 0345 6060 973. And as Jackie mooted, the idea that this is normal would, oddly enough, calm me down a bit. Because if it's been going on for years and we haven't sort of descended into some sort of dystopian dictatorship, then there's no reason to fear that this means we're taking one step closer to it. Today I want all the callers to have names that rhyme with where they're calling from, okay? So Chris is in Dis. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Normally I don't agree with you.
Oh, bad luck. There's a book you can buy, you know.
But, and this has been going on for a long time.
Has it? Give me an example from a previous government.
Well, the Blair government,
Yes.
gagging order on the Dr. David Kelly.
That's not the same, mate, at all. I mean, it's about you're perfectly entitled to be concerned by it or to believe that there are questions that still need answering, but there was no sort of suggestion that massive businesses would lose government contracts as a result of David Kelly saying things the government didn't want him to say?
Well, with my tinfoil hat on, I could say, if he said the wrong things, then it would have made it impossible for Blair to go to war.
But he did say all the wrong things.
And if he had been interrogated further,
but he was the source for that story about the so-called sexed-up dossier. This is, I'm not going to refer back to the fact that you said you don't often agree with me, but this is bonkers, mate.
All right, well, let's move on then.
But just in the context of what we're talking about, well, just look at Universal Credit, £1.8 billion worth of business, divvied up among companies and charities, all of whom are sworn to silence when it comes to criticising Universal Credit, which is proving to be, as everything Ian Duncan Smith has ever touched has proved to be, an undiluted disaster. David Kelly's not part of this story, mate.
No, sounds a bit like what goes on in the NHS.
Go on, that's better.
And I've got anxiety about our current leader.
Well, so have I, but give me an example of what goes on in the NHS.
Well, we don't know because it's so under secrecy.
Yes. No, I buy that. And so we need someone who does know. Not someone, obviously, who's going to break a non-disclosure agreement or a gagging order or anything like that, but someone who can remind us of stories where the evidence of something really bad was there, but nobody was either empowered or compelled to reveal it, which might take us back to that hospital in Staffordshire, if memory serves. 10:30 is the time. I'm still in search of an oyster knife this morning. We've got the oyster and we know what's in it, but we haven't quite shucked it successfully. So who can help us, given that the people who are best placed to help us are banned from helping us by the government that's paying them to help them? If you're just tuning in, there's an astonishing triangulation of tales in the media this morning involving looking in the rearview mirror at Universal Credit. Was it £1.8 billion worth, I mentioned a moment ago, of business being divvied up among charities and businesses to help unemployed people get back into work, but none of these companies or charities are allowed to criticise Esther McVeigh, who's in charge of Universal Credit. Then you come to the Grenfell inquiry. Companies brought in to inspect cladding on similar buildings in less than a fortnight after, and you'll remember at the time Theresa May was in receipt of all manner of criticisms and drubbings for her conduct in the immediate aftermath of that tragedy. Brought in to investigate and ideally prevent or remove the prospect of any repetition of that type of tragedy, but banned from criticising Theresa May or casting the government in a bad light. It might be that there is nothing in those investigations that casts the government in a bad light, but if there is, we're not allowed to know until a whistleblower comes along. And then number 3, Chris Failing, his disastrous probation service overhaul, which everybody informed and everybody intelligent knew was going to fail. The charities and businesses that were charged with either trying to make the best of a bad lot or putting, what's that phrase, putting lipstick on the pig of Chris Grayling's idea were banned from criticising it. Now, of all the stuff we talk about, and I know today we could be talking about that disgusting Grenfell Tower bonfire night story, or we could be talking about, I think the university's minister has said something about safe spaces. Most of the people in the business of opinion journalism are writing about or talking about utter trivialities, because the important stuff's so complicated, and also because they can't admit they made a mistake on Brexit in the case of most right-wing commentators. But this kind of story seems to me to be immense. If this was happening in a foreign country, I'd find it interesting. But it's happening here. Am I going mad when I say this is huge? 0345 606 0973. Sabre, what a great name. Sabre is in Sheffield. Sabre, what can you tell us?
Yeah, thanks a lot. No, you're not going mad. I used to work as a research methodologist. I mean, that's my job, and I specialised in niche population research. And basically, I mean, that's more or less, finding out for brands, for governments, for retail agents, for any type of organisation, charities included. What do people think? What do people think of them?
Yes.
So that means that, the questions would be raised by these guys, and we would actually articulate these in terms of questionnaires and design surveys.
Go on.
And my job was more or less to work with the owners of the message.
Right.
to actually...
I'm losing you a bit. I don't know if you're speaking in code because you don't want to identify any.
Oh no, of course. I mean, that included governments. I mean,
so you'd have a political client, a governmental client.
Well, it could be a political client. It could be a top brand. It could be
with a top brand,
NGO.
I don't mind because that's what you might call commercially sensitive information, right?
Yes.
No, so that's what I'm confused by. So let's leave the brands out of it. It's if the government, if a government or a council is the client.
Government agencies, yes, that's right. And that also includes local authorities as well. Loads of local authorities, I can tell you.
But is there ever a case for saying that we need you to promise to be quiet because otherwise you could do more harm than good?
You have to sign documentation. The conversations are very much actually...
No, I get that, but I'm looking at the question of, look, if I bring you in to fix something and the public don't currently know that it's broken, it seems to me perfectly reasonable to ask you to fix it without telling the public that it's broken, because if you tell them that it's broken, they're going to panic and it's going to be even harder to fix than it is when they don't know that it's broken.
Well, that's right. No, they want you to be on script.
Yeah, but where's the line between being on script and being muzzled?
Well, you do feel muzzled, but, your professional duty is to kind of ensure that you do your best in terms of following that script as best as you can and walking on a tightrope and then making sure that if you have a question of conscience, at that point
Mate, this is getting scary. People are sending me stuff.
And I don't work in that field now, and I'll tell you something. I worked in things like government inquiries. I don't work on things like stop and serious stuff.
Yeah.
I don't work in that field now. I mean, I now work. I'm a chartered surveyor now, just to look after properties, but look for properties. But my point here is this: it is sinister.
Well, listen to this. The government has defended asking businesses to sign secrecy agreements in private discussions about the UK's future border arrangements with the EU, which reportedly include laying out scenarios for a no-deal Brexit. NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, are reported to have been signed with logistic companies and industry bodies who've been part of a consultation on the future UK border, according to Sky News. So Andrew Bridgen, the most ludicrous of MPs, even in a universe that contains Nadine Dorries, can turn up on Irish radio and claim that because he's English, he's entitled to an Irish passport, and the government's comfortable with allowing that sort of nonsense to go around the world unchallenged, except by the journalist interviewing him. But actual businesses consulting on the future of our nation are banned from telling the nation the truth.
Yes, it's true. And
Brexit?
That's frightening.
Prisons, probation service, universal credit, the NHS, probably. I haven't got a story about that, but someone will send me one in a matter of moments. And then, of course, the story that has kicked all of this off, which is the front page of the Times today.
Can I just say about homelessness?
Yeah, go on.
Well, look, yesterday I tried to speak to the Minister of Housing I asked a question in terms of what exactly is happening in terms of families, homelessness in terms of families.
Yes.
And the story was, he kind of gave a nice glossy story about, we're doing this, we're doing that. But the question here is 79,000 homeless families in temporary accommodation. How many children?
But there's no gag there. There's no gag there. I mean, the numbers are available.
Yeah, but then if you do, when I was doing research at that time, you're not allowed to kind of talk about, you're allowed to bring out your conscience, are you? You can't talk about things which are actually of conscience. At that point, you then...
No, I hear you. We're just moving ever so slightly away from the sort of direction of traffic, although in a very illuminating way, Sabre. I'm very grateful to you. But I'll focus on the main thrust of what you rang in to tell us when you were undertaking research in the charity sector and you would not be allowed to go public with it. Here's one. These are the kind of messages I'm hoping to get today. Hi, James. I'd rather not be named due to the nature of my job, but in relation to the censoring of criticism of the government over Grenfell, I think one question well worth asking would be why Sajid Javid was not reprimanded and or questioned with regard to why neither he nor previous secretaries of the then DCLG did not implement the review of Section 12 of ADB Volume 2. There's evidence here, perhaps, and I'm going to stop reading now because I don't have the expertise or the knowledge. I'll keep that on record. But that's perhaps one reason why the stories won't get the traction that they deserve, because they're going to be really, really complicated. But that idea that you can't criticise the government 10 days after Grenfell Tower burned, you can come in and help us make sure there aren't any more, but please, no, not even please, but if you want the money to undertake these investigations and inquiries, you cannot criticise us. Come on. Even if you're slightly to the right of Genghis Khan, this has got to stink, hasn't it? So yet another example, as with yesterday, of why I think we now, together, you and me, have to really start rowing away from the idea of party politics. Not least because people like me aren't represented anymore by party politics, but because if you're going to respond to this story by asking what colour the scarf is of the politician that we're talking about, then you are complicit in the corruption of our democracy. Oh, it's a Conservative and O'Brien's a lefty. Oh, down with O'Brien. No. This is about being a human. It's about being a citizen of these islands. And it's about having a government now that will gag charities and businesses, prevent them from telling you the truth about stuff in return for money. Alan is in Fleet. Alan, can you help me turn my dial down?
No, James, this is an abuse of power. It borders on corruption and blackmail. If you have got a charity which can provide a service, the best service possible for the value on that tender, and you refuse to give that to them unless they sign up to a non-disclosure, that is blackmail, and you're using the charity's ideal of helping people against them, because you know they're not going to say no. Because
what's
if
that
they
whistling?
say no,
I'm listening to you, I promise, but there's a whistling noise in the background.
Someone's whistling in the background.
Who is? What's he do? Tell him to shut up. You're on national radio.
But that is, they're deliberately knowing that the charities can't say no, because if they say no, those thousands
they won't get the money. They won't get the help. But there must sometimes be pragmatic reasons for it. You can't have everything. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry seeing the inner workings of your business. There will be occasions when you can reasonably say, "Don't go public with this. If you do, you're going to lose the gig." But if it's as broad as criticising the government, it's not like trade secrets or something like that. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Commercial sensitivity, fair enough. Security issues, potentially the Brexit border issues. You could argue there's a security element
just
within
about
that. Which
you could. Not really.
But if you're providing services to vulnerable people, and the only reason you are not allowing them to criticise you is because your policies are leading to the vulnerability for those people in the first place, and to protect your future career, which is what Esther McVeigh has done, is because she's got a history of basically dropping loads of stuff onto vulnerable people, so she wants to minimise the amount of fallout she gets going forward. That's the reason behind that. Everyone who's signed these should be given an FOI request as to how and when it was signed, what was the request, who asked them to sign it. That should be made public. And anyone in a position of ministerial...
I think so. And it's not a right-wing, left-wing issue. It's not a right-wing, left-wing issue. I bet there are councils up and down the country that would happily gag contractors, charities, commercial operations that are delivering services, would happily gag them from revealing to the public what a mess the system is in, because that way you lose elections. Oh boy. All right, 9.5, 14 minutes to go. Was it £3 billion that the probation overhaul cost? Utter disaster. Companies and charities involved in helping prisoners get back to work, get back onto civilian life, banned from criticising it. Universal credit unfolding before our very eyes, as even by the standards of its architect Ian Duncan Smith, it's an unprecedented disaster. Not necessarily did it have to be. And plenty of powerful arguments for why bringing benefits into a more simple, streamlined system would be a good idea. But honestly, in retrospect, you think Ian Duncan Smith had concern for some of society's most vulnerable people at the heart of his political project? Of course he didn't. I'm allowed to say that. If I was part of a charity or a business working on ameliorating the devastating effects of universal credit, I wouldn't be allowed to say that. I'd lose my gig, I'd lose my contract. Brexit and borders, road hauliers, gagged from sharing the information that they're sharing with government. That maybe is why the callers to this programme have been so powerful and so valuable. There's some of the haulage companies that haven't signed gagging orders, like our friend John Shirley or Kieran the van driver, ringing up to tell us simple truths. Simple truths that we've been listening to on this programme for a year, but which the Financial Times reported a fortnight ago the Cabinet was shocked to discover. A year after we discovered it, by asking people doing the job what the reality was. Why wouldn't Cabinet know? Well, same reason you don't know. not enough interest, not enough concern, and gagging orders in place. She won't be sharing this with the cabinet. She's the most secretive Prime Minister that I think we've ever had. So that's probation, that's Brexit, and then most egregiously of all, Grenfell. 12 days after the Grenfell Tower fire, experts hired to test cladding were banned from criticising Theresa May or doing anything to embarrass her. What could possibly be beneficial to Britain about banning people investigating a tragedy from telling us whether or not politicians played a part in failing to prevent it? Gavin is in Chichester. Gavin, what would you like to say?
Big fan. I just thought I'd try and get your dial turned down to 5. So I think you're being slightly melodramatic.
Possibly, yes.
So since the dawn of time, people do work. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. And I think the government, with freedom of information, with the information overload, people have got complacent, and it's now in the public domain that this is what happens. But it happens in everyday business. For example,
But I've already made the distinction between the public interest and commercial sensitivity. I want to know whether or not the government bears any responsibility for the Grenfell Tower tragedy, but the people that the government is paying to investigate it have been banned from telling me whether or not the government bears any responsibility for the Grenfell Tower tragedy. Come on, Gav.
Yep. So the Grenfell Tower position, that's a 9.5. But the rest with regards to standard government contracts, be that with the large companies, which are quite often mentioned in Private Eye, etc., who get the government contract after the government contract, they get them, and it's the employees who, when they speak out, they get fired, but the fat cats at the top with the politicians continue to renew the contracts. So you are completely right that the 9.5 is right on Grenfell.
What about this one? Chris Grayling banned 39 prisoner rehabilitation charities from causing him, quotes, adverse publicity, end quotes, when he was Justice Secretary.
Yes, well, he did that because obviously the charities, there are probably less right-wing inclined people work in charities, so they're going to be more.
Yeah, but mate, adverse publicity. You can ban them from revealing stuff that might compromise the security of a system, but any adverse publicity. So if Chris Grayling essentially turned up drunk to a meeting, then under the terms of these agreements, they'd be banned from telling us.
Yes, but we both have the same opinion about him. He's just a buffoon, so he thinks he's beyond the law and can actually issue
You're supposed to be turning my dial down, Gavin.
Yes, but it's only the odd one like him and a few others. So the point
is... you're sounding like what did the Romans ever do for you now, mate? So we go, yeah, all right, well, 9.5. No, I'll give you 9.5 on the Grenfell stuff, and yeah, all right, 9.25.
9.5 and knock yourself down to 7.
All right, we'll meet you halfway. We'll call it 8, all right? But
okay.
So on some of it, like if you were building a prison, then you'd have to sign something not revealing, obviously, otherwise it'd be like Prison Break. It'd only be one episode in the next series because they'd publish the plans. But you know and I know that is not really what I'm talking about. Bill's in Ladbroke Grove. Bill, what do you think?
Hello, James. Nice to talk to you.
Likewise, Bill.
What it is I've been in contact with Public Health England for some time now, just trying to get samples of the asbestos and how they're dealing with it. I mean, I've asked them time and time again on different things. I mean, but what they do...
Are you talking, judging from the fact that you're in Ladbroke Grove, we're talking about Grenfell Tower, are we, Bill?
That's exactly right,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, basically, you've got the school right next to it. They're removing asbestos without all the proper procedures in place.
Mate, I'm not across this, and that's a fairly sweeping accusation that you've made. So legally, I'm not comfortable continuing this conversation because I do not know of what you speak. Do you see what I mean? And the people that you're accusing of malfeasance are not here either to account for themselves or to defend themselves. So we're going to have to park the specifics of that. How plausible do you think it is that, and I think I probably know your answer to this, mate, to be fair, but that the government is deliberately suppressing information that is not just of interest to the public, but of importance to the public?
Right, well, when I get a reply back and it says, I can read this because it's not to do with the email. It says, this may not be disclosed to any other person without the express authority of Public Health England.
Yeah.
So basically, I cannot say what they've actually said in the email sent to me.
Again, I'm uncomfortable with the specifics because I don't have the knowledge that I need, and I don't really have the understanding of what was sent to you, because unless you have I'm pretty sure that unless you have signed something, then they can't. But I'm getting too confused and complicated. But we'll look into it. Send me an email if you want, if you think there's stuff I need to know about. 10:57 is the time. And this is why whistleblowing legislation is so important and why they hate it so much. And this is not left-right. Could easily imagine this being a government of any hue or persuasion. And look at Jeremy Corbyn's attitude to criticism. Blimey. Susie's in Brighton. Susie, what would you like to say?
Oh, yes. Hi, James.
Hello,
we've been campaigning down here against the Brexit situation, of course, and we had a meeting as Brighton voted overwhelmingly to remain. And we've had meetings with students and been very confused as to why they're not getting more involved. And at one meeting with a vice chancellor, I said, when I was a student, I worked for NUS many years ago. We were quite political. Why weren't they more involved? And he said the student unions have charitable status, which I wasn't aware of.
Yes.
So in the same way that other charities aren't able to lobby politically, and that's because of legislation that's been brought in, the Lobbying Act. They can't get involved in the same way.
Really?
That was his explanation, and I thought it was quite interesting because we. Student unions back in the day had quite a lot of, not influence.
I thought they did. I'm not across this either. This is a festival of ignorance on my part. And
I wasn't aware of it because it just seemed like the natural thing.
I'll tell you what, though, the students are always revolting, to be a little bit glib.
Yeah, they are revolting.
But the other element of what you say, of course, is that then you've got that pincer movement, which I'm sure isn't deliberate, but the way the media is now obsessed with students doing what students have always done. If they are being in some way gagged officially or legislatively, and at the same time they're going to be terrified increasingly of putting their head above the parapet because they could end up being talked about on LBC or on page 7 of the Daily Mail for having the audacity to redecorate their student union or bring in a toilet that everybody can use. That suppression of dissent is really odd, and we're back to where this hour began. Susie, thank you. With those slight fears of fascistic flavours creeping into Western democracies. They're not creeping into America, they're goose-stepping up Fifth Avenue. But the idea that dissent is silenced by people who claim that they're the free speakers. We move on now to something completely different. A story that